All right, we'll go ahead and get started and just let anybody else trail in. It's about 5 after 2 in Central Time. My name is William Stoner. I'm working with Red Leg. Red Leg was founded in 2008, initially as an IT reseller and services company, and a couple years after that got into the security field. We take pride in giving the best services we can to our customers and partners so that we can improve your security stance and the security of your business. We do both offensive and defensive security. And what we'll be talking about today is coming from the offensive side, just using the reports that you'll get out of a VA. And keep in mind that the stuff we have here while we're presenting, this is information that's good for use with other security partners as well. And I will hand us off to Jake Terry, who is a member of the Red Leg offensive team and has a lot of experience doing vulnerability assessment and also penetration testing.
So today we're going to be talking about getting the most out of our Red Leg's reports and spreadsheets that we give to our clients. They do come off first as a lot of information. We give a spreadsheet and a database from Tradecraft Labs. And from those, our clients usually find what they need to be patching and new changes to their network, new vulnerabilities. It's really just a health diagnosis of your network. So first, it is, like I said, a lot of information, and we shouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves before we start triaging and reviewing that spreadsheet. So first, we should talk about what a vulnerability scan is. So our vulnerability scans are meant to kind of kick the tires of your network and see where an attacker might go, or what path they might use. Our penetration tests are the next level up from that, which we as the testing team have a goal, being sensitive documents, information, domain controller access, any of those. And those are really our bread and butter and what we usually do for most of our clients. The red team exercise is the final evolution of that path, where everything is simulated completely as an attacker who has no information of your network, is trying to be as quiet as possible, while still having the same goals of finding sensitive documents and systems. So our difference between our internal and external, first is we need to determine sets of patchable systems or systems that you want to target. Make sure this isn't QA or testing, because usually those systems or networks are very out of date. We've had many clients who've had hundreds and hundreds of critical and high vulnerabilities just because they were scanning a QA or development subnet. Between that, we also do our external is usually based on OWA and VPN attacks, which gives a good look at how an attacker might look at getting into your network from the outside. The internal is always going to have, so far to me, has always had more vulnerabilities, usually a lot more criticals and highs, because those networks aren't as closely examined as the peripheral network. So our reports are very often quite long and can be hard to digest and sometimes hard to take. Like I said earlier, never catalog a failure, but hard to digest, meaning that it, like I said, is a lot of information. And where do you really start when you have so many vulnerabilities and so many systems that are affected by those vulnerabilities? What is important? Which vulnerabilities can fall to the wayside, and which ones are quite important? And so we should use this as a guide to a better security posture, a better understanding of your own network, and ways to improve for the future. Um, so these reports also need to be distributed to who would have their fingers in the pie. For example, uh, application developers, the security group is always a good team to give it to. Those teams usually have the most oversight into the process, and also what needs fixing, what doesn't need fixing. And finally, I'll give this part to Bill. He knows a little bit more about the post engagement and how to process these parts of the reports.
Cool. So yeah, as Jake was saying, the reporting is kind of a view of the network at the time, and that can vary greatly depending on what targets you choose. If it is everything on the inside, obviously there are times when you do want to do your QA systems and your testing systems. Some clients will do everything at once. Some will split into production and QA. But the way I like to think of it is the report is kind of really the whole vulnerability assessment is kind of a checkup from your doctor. And so when you get that report back, hopefully you're fairly excited to see what is, where you might have issues. There may be things that don't show up that you thought would show up. But the first thing you'll want to do when you get that report is just give it a quick review and do some triage. So look for your highs and criticals right off the bat, see where those live, see if they're on critical business systems, if they're on systems that are accessible to the internet or customers, just to get a sense of, here's our highs and criticals. Sure, maybe I have this critical issue here, but it's on a system that I know only 6 people touch and that is locked away. So, you're basically going through the triage, working up a plan to do your remediation and just kind of get a lay of the land. And again, it's just kind of a quick review of the report, quick review of the spreadsheet. As you're noting systems that need attention, you'll want to determine who those appropriate stakeholders, who the system owners are, who the developers are that work on that system. And then, at some point you'll want to maybe jot down a few notes that you can give to each of those appropriate teams and review those with the people from those teams. One thing we will do if, we do at the end of a engagement, we'll do a debrief meeting. If you feel you need additional meetings, we're always open to, joining you for those calls and helping you walk through the data. So after doing the triage, the next thing to do is, again, prioritize where we're going to do our remediation. Now, we're talking primarily about network testing, but the same would apply to application testing as well. So, if you're doing agile, part of that prioritization and triage would be determining which fixes are going to go first and into which sprints. And of course, obviously, as you're prioritizing, you may need to reach out to other subject matter experts who are familiar with those systems that you've identified as needing the immediate attention. So obviously, once you have that plan done, the next thing that you will be doing is working the remediation. Now that may be your team, it may be other teams. I've been in environments in past job lives where, you know, the patching team is a completely separate team. It's a huge network. And so we were more liaisons to those guys, presenting them with the information they need to fix their systems, um, and their change boards and all that, control access. And so you'll just want to alert those stakeholders and system owners of what's going on. And again, if we're in more of a um, application orientation, you're going to want to look for ways to improve your continuous integration if you have those processes. And again, as you're acting, you know, the other thing is you're always looking to improve that security stance and improve the amount of um, time that's going into the remediations, just to streamline your systems and your protocols and procedures. Now, once the remediation has been performed, the next thing you need to do is review that remediation and verify that it has actually done what it was supposed to do and fix any of the vulnerabilities or, you know, entry points that we've discovered in the VA. Another way I like to look at the VA is kind of as a you know, a robber looking at a house. He's going to look for things like broken windows, loose doors, that he can get into pretty easily. So, you know, from this view, we're looking and testing, retesting those things that we identified as maybe a broken window on the network, that somebody might be able to get into. So, you know, there's several routes of post remediation testing that you can take. There's informal testing, which is generally going to be your internal testing team. Um, you know, going back, we do try to provide um, we provide remediation information and tips. And then if we're talking a penetration test instead of just a straight VA, there'll be additional information there on, you know, perhaps tactics that attackers might take. And those will be useful for your internal team. With the, again, with at the penetration test level, there's also enough information in there that you can fully create an attack or recreate the attack on that. At the vulnerability assessment level, you know, that information is not necessarily going to be there, but if your internal team is doing the post remediation testing and has questions, we're obviously there as a resource for that. And then we do a lot of formal retesting as well, where we will come back in, and generally there's one of two things that we can do there. We'll only retest the issues that were identified in the VA, or sometimes, depending on the system, you know, a lot of times on internet-facing systems, web servers and things like that, lots of code will change in a short to medium amount of time. And so if it's a fairly static system, we would probably just recommend doing the identified issues testing, as that's generally quicker. If it's a system that's updated frequently or has major changes, then we might do a full vulnerability retest and test the entire system again to see if, you know, any new issues have popped up as well. Generally, we're going to be doing the identified issues testing though. So anything that the original report clearly identified will get retested, and then you'll be notified, you know, yes, this issue's been taken care of, this issue hasn't been taken care of. And I think we can go on to the next slide. I think we're going to hand back to Jake here.
So speaking of what Bill was saying, so we can use many of our vulnerability VA spreadsheets to give a month-by-month checkup to your network, so you're kind of banging on the windows and seeing what's going on. So we, as the testing partner, Red Lake as the testing partner, understand the risks that are associated with your network, especially if we're doing a vulnerability scan every month and a penetration test once or twice a year. We get very familiar with the network that we're testing. So that gives us better insight into what attack paths an attacker would use, as well as what is important to the system. That would include such things as domain controllers, network file shares, email servers, anything that really has important data on it. One of the first penetration tests I ever did, we had quite a few critical and high vulnerabilities. Quite a few of those highs were mostly just because of outdated virtual machines, which hosted lots of their end users as well as a few of their web services. They also had a completely free network file share, which gave us access to quite a bit of their information. For the external side, we also we like to target VPNs, web app office, OWA office, and our any kind of homegrown authentication portals or firewall authentication portals. So those are the high-risk systems that we would tell our clients to first fix these before you fix anything else, which for our criticals, we kind of recommend as soon as possible, but within 15 to 30 days, 30 to 60 days for highs, 60 to 90 days for mediums, and anything after that. Your lows can be patched within. Those are kind of a good standard to have. So over testing time, the internal testing team our testing team will continue to learn the network, which gives us more, like I said, insight into remediation times and understanding the latest risks to the network. An internal team can get very laser focused, protecting these systems from these threats because they've happened before, or because they are known to the team before, or they are the new hotness, quote unquote, which gives a internal testing team quite a bit of tunnel vision, which makes it hard for them to see outside of that box, which is where Red Lake comes in, where we have a new, fresh look on the network, what an attacker might use to breach your network, as well as other ways to access the network from external resources. We've also had clients who have bought new companies, and they've needed those segments or applications triaged and scanned, and they need to understand the health of that network. So we've done that for our clients as well. Once again, those things aren't catalogs of failure, so it shouldn't be pushed off onto the old IT team or anything like that. It's just really a health checkup of the network, seeing where things are bad and where things can be improved. So this is just a little recap. So Bill, if you want to recap this real quick.
There we go. Yeah, so again, with the vulnerability assessment, we're talking a fairly high level look at what's going on. We scan the network, we find the broken doors and windows, we make sure that what the scanning tools and assessment tools say are broken are actually broken and actual issues, and then we get that report over to you. And then again, you know, what you'll want to do with that report is just triage, prioritize where you're going to do your remediations, remediate, and then review the remediation process to make sure that everything appears to have worked properly in the remediation, and then of course verify that by doing retesting. And the important thing is to take a long-term view of security. I've seen clients who, this is more in past life, but at other jobs where I've done similar stuff, I've seen clients who took a long-term view, and they started with really large reports with lots of criticals and highs, and they prioritized what needed to be done and focused primarily on the criticals for say the first month of VA, got those weaned down, then went to the highs, and then the mediums, and then the lows, and just kind of step through the whole process. And I've seen companies that do that very successfully, and because they have that kind of discipline, they were able to get their networks in really good shape, over the course of a few months to a year. And then I've seen, companies that you test one year and you come back the next year and they've got the same issues. Why that is, can't really say, but it's sometimes disheartening to see that from a tester's point of view, that either the client's too overwhelmed with the amount of data and doesn't know how to do that triage and prioritization. And so a lot of times you think they're overwhelmed. There's some reason that things aren't getting patched. And it's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And just knowing which bites to take first is an important piece of that, and getting that kind of skill down, getting your teams to that point where they're able to interact with each other and identify where those things are, what the critical systems are. A lot of it is, a lot of chewing through this data is knowing or finding out where those critical systems lay and what systems are most important to the business functions of your company, and making sure that those things are taken care of quickly, making sure that high target areas like VPNs or web email servers, things like that, are locked down well. And so really it's just take that long-term, work on that long-term view of security, and help your team members, both above you and below you in the company organization, to realize that it is a long-term solution, and it is constantly shifting too. So
And
it's
along
about
those
that.
lines, there also needs to be a consensus between the networking team, the patching team, the infrastructure, whatever you want to call them, and the higher ups, because we've had clients who have only had 1 day per quarter to patch, and they've had uncountable criticals and highs. They've their system is wholly all over the place, but they only have 1 day to patch. So, like you said, where do you start eating the elephant?
Yeah, it can be a difficult thing, especially in larger companies.
Mm-hmm. So now I guess we will open it up to questions if anyone has any.
And you can ask us about vulnerability assessment stuff, about reports, about penetration stuff, tools that we use, anything. It's kind of wide open if you've got questions or comments. Yeah, so eating the elephant when you only have 1 day to patch, that is obviously a long haul issue. And I would approach that. I worked for a fairly large corporate environment doing their testing and stuff. Uh, but from that experience, I would say what you would need to do is, take your day of patching, triage the best you can if you're the remediation team, or work alongside the remediation team to try to start with what you've identified as the most critical business system or group of systems. Start there, and then as you, excuse me, as you get those done, build into that time of remediation some time to just be a liaison to the higher ups and show them, here's what we have in the report. We've got 20 critical systems. We need to do, say 10 critical patches across those systems in order to do this properly and test to make sure that, of course, sometimes when you patch, bad things happen. So in order to get that stuff set, we're going to need some additional time. And it's just going to be a process of showing them that, remediation times need to expand. And again, maybe by organizing those systems, you can get a couple extra days of remediation time in different groups and just make sure that you're going from the most critical business systems down. As far as 0 days, that's a good question. As far as using the reports to prioritize and fix using risk versus level of effort as well, I guess I would, for that, if I'm fixing my critical systems, I would look at the breadth of what those systems need and, perhaps patch not just the criticals and highs on those systems, but the mediums and lows as well. And then as far as 0 days, one of the things we'll do with our clientele is if we are in a position where we've just finished a assessment and a new 0 day has popped and become known, we may come back to them and ask for additional scan time, and, let them know that, hey, I don't know if you've seen this, you probably have, but this new 0 day is out there. We'd like to make sure that, the current scan was done when we didn't know about that. There weren't signatures for it. We have some tests we'd like to perform just to make sure that, those things don't exist in your network. So those do get special attention from us. We try to be more than just two guys and a scanner. We try to be a part of your team, a part of your security team to, make sure that everything that we can do to help you improve your security is done.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on those, Jake.
I was going to say a good way for us to catch 0 days is usually doing our monthly scans. We do a comparison of vulnerabilities per month to month. So you can see if there's any rises in certain kinds of vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities affecting certain subnets or network sets. So those usually give a good, diagnosis every month of what's new and what needs to be patched. And then kind of going over how would you use your reports to prioritize what issues to fix versus risk and level of effort to fix. I think that, like Bill was saying, that's a very complicated question. You kind of have to look at your own network, your own limitations on patching specifically, and how those systems would, like Bill said, be affected when they were patched. How would that change the configuration? What users are and are not allowed on that system now? There's quite a few things to be thinking of when you are first looking at your spreadsheet. Should the SCCM guys and the scanning guys be aligned? I think the SCCM guys should use the scanning guys as a resource. That would be the best way to, for me, to maximize the efficiency of both groups. The scanning guys will, like I've said, have a kind of a broad overview of the network and its trends, where the SCCM guys would be doing more of the grunt work.
Yeah, I think it's important to, if that kind of team camaraderie is not in place, it's important to build up one or two guys from each team that can kind of liaison back to the other team.
Yeah.
So that they are on the same page with things. When I was at a semi-large corporate, that's the way we ran it. There was a separate team that was, away from testing. And then at one point we actually split off and had a separate vulnerability team as well. So, just making sure that there's good communications between those groups. The other thing I really like to see is, if you've heard the terms red team and blue team for offensive and defensive. Conversely, the blue team would be the defense and the red team would be the offense. But those teams should also have liaisons. And they should, in my world, those teams should always sit together if you're in a bullpen kind of situation, so that they can bounce ideas off of each other. Because oftentimes, the blue team guy is going to think a little bit differently than the offensive red team guy. And if a given issue comes up, the ability for them to sit there and bounce ideas off each other can sometimes really assist in finding solutions quickly. So yeah, that's a good question.
My favorite clients are always the ones who catch us doing bad stuff. They're always, very versed in their networks. They know what's going on inside their network. They know the best authentication methods. They know quite a bit more than I usually expect.
Yeah, I think the 30, 60, 90-day patch cycle is an excellent starting place. Again, the other factor you want to put in on that is the criticalness of the business systems. That's something that, in my opinion, you really need to have down. Because again, there'll be some things, going on a strict 30, 60, 90. Oh, sorry. Let me repeat the question. So the question is a 30, 60, 90 patch cycle a good starting place for your remediation? And, that's critical, high, medium, 30, 60, 90. So criticals within 30 days, highs within 60, and mediums within 90. And again, the only caveat I would throw to that is your supercritical systems should probably be attempt to be fully patched in that first 30 days, regardless of, critical high, low.
Mhm.
However, if you're just starting off, again, that's when I've seen companies really tackle their issues and get a handle on them, they've traditionally used that critical high first and then medium, low next kind of maneuver. Um, and so for me, in addition to just going off the criticalness of the risk that was uncovered, is also the criticalness of the business system, so that if you don't have a good map of that or a good understanding of that, that's a place that you'll want to um, invest and work up that kind of information in parallel to just doing a straight 30, 60, 90 cycle.
Most of our clients are VAVS clients do patch critical rated findings, usually within 15 to 30 days. Most of them usually do it within a week, usually because they're really easy. To me, criticals are usually things that have exploit code written for them. That's just, it's not a cut, like it doesn't catch all, but most, to me, exploits have code that is written for them. So those are usually very easily patched because the vendor or the OS already has patches for it. So you really just have to hit the upgrade button. Highs are really where things can start stretching out. Um, Highs can really vary your issues. They can be anything from TLS SSL issues to Apache default files, just really configuration issues. So you could really just be slugging through those for quite a while to really understand the impact on the network, how those things would change, especially putting on new certificates or changing configurations, how those things will be, the ripple effects throughout the network from those things changing. All right, so the question, how do you protect fragile devices like printers during a scan? So we've had quite a few clients where we've had to specifically blacklist certain kinds of devices or certain subnets. In a lot of software, they also have options to turn off scanning, like Novell devices and printers, anything that could really just act weird. We've also had whole subnets be blacklisted, so you can go into, we use Nessus for example, so we can go into Nessus and go into configuration files and change those manually, which makes it a lot easier. I'm sorry, I totally just had my headset on hardware mute, so I'm sorry. Anyway, what I said, so usually there are options in the scanning software that we use to specifically not target Novell devices, printers, anything that could act funky if it gets hit with tons of random data to make it mess up. Uh, but also I go into configuration files for Nessus, and you can blacklist hosts that way, which is quite, I think it's a lot better to do that when you have huge ranges or singular IPs that you just want to take out. So that way you can still scan, say, this is very just playing it in through my head. So the boss has his own like subnet, he has his own printer and all that stuff, but you want to scan his PC but not his printer because that'll break it. So just blacklist that one printer, even though you have the whole entire subnet or whatever else, and that usually fixes the problem. The question was, do our clients also scan their own networks? A lot of them do. They have their own internal scans, and they'll compare those. We've also have companies that only rely on us, and we are their only scanning team.
Yeah, and this is Bill. I would recommend that, if you don't have an internal scanning program, you look at starting that, just because it is valuable to see, what your internal team is going to see versus what we see. The more eyes on an issue is generally better. And a lot of those, companies that do their own scanning use us as kind of a check against what's there and what they're seeing. So, I'm all for internal scanning.
Yep, I completely agree. Usually those clients also have less, let's say less, I mean, close to zero criticals. They stay pretty much up to date on the 0 days and the new criticals that come out. Those are usually high level issues, which, like I said, are configuration issues and can take a long time to fix.
So the question is, are there challenges in scanning networks with dynamically assigned IP addresses versus static IP addresses? So, do the results come back as host names or IPs? And yeah, there are definitely some challenges there. Depending on how the network's set up, if it's a fully DHCP network, we've seen issues where leases are fairly short for the nodes, and we've sometimes run into issues where we're verifying the results of a scan, and we come to find that that system has changed its lease and its IP has shifted. Oftentimes, through a name lookup, we can track that down. We have seen networks where, due to their configuration, that's not possible, and it does cause some headaches. So knowing which segments, knowing which segments use DHCP, having a grasp on how robust your IP to host name lookups are, is an important thing to talk with about your testers, to your testers, so that they're prepared for that kind of challenge. Yeah.
I'd also say using like a FQDN is not a good idea, especially with distributed apps, CDNs, and stuff like that. You can clearly hit multiple. At that point, you're really just surface scanning the website and not the actual system service.
Yeah, when I'm doing websites, I always do, to make sure that the gap isn't there, I'll always do both the FQDN and the IP.
Smart idea.
Depending. Well, if there's no more questions, it looks like we've reached our time. Thanks for coming out, everybody, and a recording of this will be posted at some point, I believe. Selena will get that out to you. And, you know, if you have any questions that pop up after this time, then, you know, feel free to reach out to us and we can get those answered for you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great afternoon.